The panic attack scene in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish received praise for its accuracy and went viral on Twitter, getting compared favorably to other worse animated panic attacks, like those in Velma and even Paw Patrol the movie. But when comparing those scenes, the discussions often overlook the fundamental challenge of showing a panic attack on screen. It's not just the risk of inaccuracy or resorting to insensitive cliches, but also the fact that panic attacks happen internally. It's entirely possible for a panic attack to happen to somebody and nobody else even knows.
When I was 23, I had my first panic attack on stage. My parents were there and couldn't tell it was happening.
So this phenomenon presents a challenge for audiovisual mediums like movies and TV. You can only perceive a character's intense emotions as an outside observer, so how do you show anxiety? The panic attack scene in Puss in Boots shows the importance of accuracy and sensitivity when portraying severe anxiety on screen, showing common symptoms like the loss of motor control, an elevated heart rate, and the importance of breathing exercises to try to calm down. And at the same time, it uses many filmmaking techniques to present those internal feelings to the external viewer. Because animation is an abstraction of the physical world, the medium can capture the feeling of anxiety through metaphors that extend past conventional human physicality. A movie like Inside Out represents fear as a thin, wiry humanoid. According to director Pete Docter, the design is based on a raw nerve, making anxiety observable by representing it as a skittish and brittle-looking character. In Puss in Boots, Puss also has exaggerated features, so when his episode starts, it's easy to see his hair stand up and pupils change. We also feel his subjective perception of time by slowing down the rest of the scene while his heart rate and reactions speed up. But despite being animated, Puss in Boots actually borrows a lot of live-action techniques to depict anxiety. We first enter his panic episode using a conventional dolly zoom, which alters the space around him, and when Puss sees death coming for him, the color palette changes from mostly orange to mostly green. As he runs away, the extreme wide-angle close-ups also physically distort his face, and the frantic, blurry camera on him contrasts the calmer, cleaner framing we get outside of his perspective. Combined together, these physical alterations of the frame externalize Puss's internal emotions. When we're in his perspective, we visualize the same distortion of space and time that he does. Through exaggeration, we get a depiction that's more honest. The use of these techniques to show anxiety is nothing new. Twitter pointed out that Paw Patrol the movie uses similar effects like the distortion of time, dolly zoom, and the sound of a quickening heartbeat. But what makes Puss in Boots so much better is the moment after this exaggerated sequence, where the movie snaps into realism as Puss lies against a tree, and the camera holds while his heart races and he tries to calm down. Because this realistic moment happened after the conventional animated intensity, it hits that much harder. The movie earns a simpler, more realistic portrayal of anxiety in this moment because we already know what's going on in Puss's head. Compare the techniques used in Puss in Boots to a scene in the TV show Velma, which not only has an inaccurate and insensitive portrayal of panic attacks, but it also uses cinematic techniques in the wrong way. The scene starts off with some classic anxiety-representing choices, like having the camera at a tilt and distorting Velma's features. The scene also abstracts anxiety by turning her mom into a monster-like figure, and showing her heart race using the cliché of a heart literally beating outside of her chest. But despite ticking the boxes, the scene loses all emotional resonance because of how quickly Velma exits all these exaggerations and snaps into the real world. It's the complete opposite of Puss in Boots. Without lingering on the moment, the techniques don't show what anxiety feels like. They're just a setup for a punchline, which both makes light of anxiety and undermines the very techniques that can show what anxiety feels like. Velma shows that animation doesn't always have the upper hand when portraying anxiety. In fact, there are plenty of live-action depictions that do it better. In live-action, filmmakers can't represent anxiety as abstractly as an animation, which often leads to more grounded, performance-centric representations. But live-action filmmakers can still get creative. As Bo Burnham explains what his anxiety feels like in Inside, the shot jumps from a dark, static wide shot to a zoom-in close-up with bright, moving lights in the background. This extreme contrast shows how anxiety can come out of nowhere, and, like the shot itself, often leads to sensory overload. Similarly, in his film 8th Grade, Burnham shows Kayla's anxiety by pulling the camera in and out of focus, dropping frames, and having Kayla and the camera out of sync. Burnham's techniques show how even live action can break conventional film techniques to show anxiety, opting for emotional resonance over continuity. And Puss in Boots actually also has intentional continuity errors. One moment cuts from Puss turning around to a shot of him facing death directly. It's a subtle, small choice, but the instant position change makes Puss feel slightly more out of sync with the world around him. so sometimes subtle choices can work just as well. In The Last of Us TV series, Joel has a panic attack, and to show his unease, the camera makes the unusual choice of having the sun move in and out of the frame, and eventually end behind Joel, creating a sort of silhouette. In typical filmmaking, this lighting would have been a distracting mistake, but in the context of a panic attack, this in-camera light distortion reflects the distortion going on in Joel's mind. And wouldn't you know it, Paw Patrol the movie does the same thing. With the same techniques reused over and over, it's tricky to know when an anxiety sequence feels authentic or veers into the cliché, which explains why so many anxiety scenes become memes online. I tend to personally appreciate the more subtle presentations. In the movie The Aviator, I'm less moved by Leonardo DiCaprio's breakdown in his car, and more moved in the moment prior, when his character feels the anxiety coming and has trouble dealing with it.
Shyness isn't cowering in a corner and not wanting to speak. Shyness is wanting to speak at every moment and not being able to. That's what anxiety is.
But at the same time, I am very excited to see The Spider Within: A Spider-Verse Story, an upcoming Spider-Man short film that depicts Miles Morales battling with mental health issues. If it's anything like the first two animated Spider-Verse films, the short will definitely use fresh and innovative techniques to depict anxiety that will transcend the repetition and cliché that many anxiety scenes fall into. When Puss in Boots came out, countless articles and Twitter threads popped up discussing its authenticity, and it does do a great job representing anxiety by using both animated and live-action techniques to capture the feeling of a panic attack. And it's sequences like these that show the interesting challenge anxiety provides to a filmmaker. Because it's an abstract but deeply intense feeling, it's an opportunity for filmmakers to stretch camera movements, lighting, and sound design to their limits. Yet filmmakers do often get anxiety wrong, and that challenge reflects the real-life challenge of anxiety. Unlike physical illness, mental illness is hard to show because many of the symptoms are internal. Yet filmmakers are up to the challenge, and the best ones know how to use either exaggeration or subtlety to capture the nuance and genuine cruelty that severe anxiety inflicts on millions of people. Anxiety is hard to talk about, and it's even harder to actually go through, especially when you have to go through it alone. But thanks to talented artists, you're not alone. Now you see it.